Cloud SIG. We went back and forth in the SIG about what the charter of this SIG would be, because cloud seems to be ever present, ever pervasive, means everything to everybody. After a while, as we discussed things as well as what was going on around us in the rest of the community, we focused on something where we're saying that the charter of our SIG is to enable service-oriented businesses and solutions that leverage the cloud. Notice that it's about the services that are leveraging the cloud, not necessarily about the cloud itself. There's plenty of work which is going on in getting the cloud. We felt that focusing on the services, new services, different kinds of things that happen within services, because the cloud is now present, was something we could contribute to in this forum, which is not in there as well. So typically by now people have talked about what is meant by the cloud. This is a generic thing that people talk about, notion being everything as a service. It's a model where I'm being able to deliver services over the internet. Typically people have started with infrastructure and IT services. So people think in terms of 3 layers: platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and software as a service. And again, as I said, we were looking at what kinds of new services can be enabled, how can we change the existing services, so in this model, we can do new things with the services. So the unique value we see ourselves creating here in this forum is that we are focusing on the impact of cloud technology on the services businesses, on the business models we are creating, the disruption that happens to the businesses we are creating, and on the services that relate to various vertical industries. So Jan mentioned in the last segment just a little bit about how people are holding data to that. The cloud offers a way where in a neutral environment, we have the ability to share enormous amounts of information. We can start using crowdsourcing kinds of techniques where people are now beginning to talk about what is happening. So far what happens in services is I go to a reference, I go to the service provider, and that's where I get the information. Now we have independent third-party people. People are beginning to talk about all kinds of services on Facebook. People send messages on Twitter, people post things, people talk about their experiences, and this kind of information can be gathered as supplementary information in addition to the things that the service providers and the other bodies are providing to start talking about services in a new way. So specifically, we were looking at a number of things inside this thing. First, we are asking the question, what kinds of new business models can we enable once you have the cloud environment present? We can do things now within the cloud environment that we were not able to do before. The taxonomy of services that are being enabled, this is not about the cloud taxonomy per se, but it's about the taxonomy of services that are being enabled inside the cloud. The issues of regulatory and compliance keeps coming back over and over again as a very, very large hurdle to cloud computing, and adoption and use of cloud for large-scale services. So the way I treat medical records is completely different than the way I treat other information. Personally, I identify with information as regulatory requirements that are both sort of policies which deal with federal or local law, but also within the context of specific service providers, people have policies about how those things are integrated inside the organization. We have to understand what these kinds of things happen, but on the same side, as we start looking across the cloud, we have the opportunity in this particular forum to go back and influence the way our leaders, our governments, our regulators deal with these issues, because I think the industry is moving faster than the regulations are. And then finally, we want to influence the standards and technologies, because these standards and technologies, we like it or not, will influence what we do within the context of services. So we see specific needs that we need to deal with, we see specific technology needs, specific standards that need to be developed, and we have the ability in this forum to talk about it from a services context, and then take those kinds of ideas back to the industry. So this is the 4 things that we were thinking about. drill down just a little bit and go the kinds of things that we have talked about so far inside this stage. From a technology driver perspective, the cloud essentially offers a economy of scale that has never been seen before inside IT. When I talk about a data center inside Amazon or Google, I'm literally talking about a data center that contains hundreds of thousands of computers in one place. These are very, very large scale systems. We think in terms of IT, provisioning 50,000 mailboxes in an IT environment in an enterprise is complete enterprise level systems. Google can do that in a few days because they have millions and millions of mailboxes inside their system that they are offering to consumers. So at that level, when we talk about an order or 2 orders of magnitude larger scale, we have the ability to do things inside these environments that cannot be done inside any enterprises larger or smaller. Scalability comes as a result. We have to redesign services and rethink services because we have this kind of scalability available inside the system. The way we provision things, the way we run things changes inside this environment. And finally, because everything is network connected, we have the ability now to, if you will, create a web of services. Think about the World Wide Web as a web of information. Now we have the ability to think about the web of services. And that gets back into the kinds of vertical domain questions that we've been talking about, the ability to leverage all of the work we are doing jointly and bring it together in a form where we can very easily put things together. Side by side, the business models are different inside this environment because finally we are getting to the pay-per-use sort of the, I plug the thing in and I get a service out and I pay for what I use money. All of this says that now services that were otherwise not economically viable are becoming viable because the initial cost of provisioning something is much, much smaller. Today, if I go to Sandhill Road and I talk to venture capitalists, and I say, I'm starting a new startup, and I would like this much money for my IT infrastructure. Their reaction is to look at me and say, why aren't you using Amazon? Why do you need this money? Right? So at this point in time, the kinds of things that people are looking for when we are starting new businesses, when we are starting creating new services, IT is becoming a point where you can go get IT and you can get as much IT as you need, but you don't have to worry about it in terms of capital expense. We have to, and if we start thinking about this kind of model for existing services, scaling services up and down becomes a lot easier. I can manage the resources I have with the groups and values inside the demand I have. I can start thinking in terms of primarily operations cost as opposed to the capital investment I have to make inside my service. And these things also change existing services, the way we think we have to these services inside this environment. And finally, mobility is becoming important. This morning as I was driving up, they were talking about smartphones, and their comment was, this growth rate of smartphones has suddenly decreased to 50% per year. Right? This is something where they're talking about how it has decreased to 50%. We would love to see services which have that kind of growth rate. All of the kinds of services we are used to providing are now being provided on handheld mobile devices. And this suddenly expands the reach of services to a very large fraction of the population that did not have access to these services before. The ability of people inside third world countries, ability of people inside growing countries using mobile phones and mobility services is enormous. People in India are now willing to provide health care using mobile devices. And finally, I mentioned before micro-vertical services. These are things where we start small things where vertically integrated systems can be put together because it's an ecosystem in this environment. I'm going to skip the taxonomy. There was a very, very large debate about a year and a half ago about what the cloud means and what the taxonomy of this means. This debate has by and large settled down. At this point in time, I think we all know what these cloud words mean. We went around and looked at the different taxonomies people are using. And the recommendation we are making is that we just adopt the design recommendation which is provided by NIST. It's by, I mean, you can still argue about it, but it's probably as good as anything else. They're a neutral party, they're a government agency, so they have a definition which is pretty much good enough. And they have an open process starting in January, so anybody who needs to participate in that particular forum can participate either as individuals or as bodies. Regulatory compliance is one of the largest hurdles people offer about putting data inside the cloud environments. Because even though we put the data inside the cloud environments, the ownership and the compliance responsibility for that data resides with the person who put that data in the cloud environment. And this is something where national boundaries come into play, where local boundaries come into play, there are differences in requirements and compliance. So this is something we have to think about. And again, within this body, unlike many others, we have the ability as a global team to go back to these individuals and say, these are the kinds of issues we are seeing. In order to enable these things, here are changes that we need to make. I think I will end with this slide, where we are talking about different kinds of standards and architectures. Pretty much any standard body, which calls itself a standard body, at this point in time is talking about a cloud standard. And I have a long list, but you name it, they are there. Largely, people are beginning to talk. This is the picture on the right-hand side is from NIST. Largely, people are talking about things. The key areas that people are talking about happen to be in security, performance, virtualization and management, and automation, notice services, and synchronous. So I think we have to think about what the implications of these standards are for services, what kinds of services do we wish to standardize in these environments, because we have to rely on third-party services here, and what we will do to influence these standards. So I will stop here and take questions. Last slide. Here is the current team. I hope I got the names and the affiliations correct. So I think I saw two of us here, right? Daniel and
Mickey here.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Again said. So some of us are here. Feel free to come in and talk to us. We are very interested in collaborating with other SIGs and chapters in order to take this work forward. Because again, we think that it is within the context of these verticals that we will be able to make the most progress.
Thanks, Rod.